Hey, Martin, welcome to the show. It's really great to have you on. We've got a lot of fascinating ground to cover, especially for our audience of developers who are always looking to get that edge in productivity and efficiency. I'd love to start off with something foundational. In your view, what really sets an agentic AI development tool apart from the more typical code assistants that developers might already be familiar with, like a Copilot or a ChatGPT? Let's dive in there and see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah, so I think that when it comes to code assistants that are truly agentic, the main thing that puts them apart from other types of code assistants is that they have access to tools. And it is the tools that make the code assistant powerful. So, for example, we have seen Cursor that have truly worked on integrating the AI models with the context that you have in the code base. So by exposing tools to AI models, the agentic code assistant can assemble the correct context and give that context to the model. And that gives the model all the information that it needs in order to either generate the response or use other tools to further research the code base. So the results of an approach that uses tools is a lot more precise and a lot more focused on actually solving real problems than just chatting with ChatGPT, for example.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's really that tool using capability and that richer integration into the actual development environment that turns it from just a smart autocomplete into something more like an agent that can reason and act. We're not just talking about something that suggests the next line of code. We're talking about a kind of AI partner that can actually orchestrate tools, understand your project's context deeply, and essentially become a more strategic helper. So let me ask you this. For someone who's just getting into using an agentic tool like Cursor AI, how would you recommend they start structuring their project or their repo so that the AI can really get that holistic understanding of what's going on? Let's give our listeners a practical foothold there.
So one of the most powerful workflows that I think works really well with Cursor is to actually have all of your project and all of its dependencies in the same workspace, and to ask AI to create a plan for implementing a task. And when you ask it to create a plan, you also include specific relative paths within that workspace to the code that is relevant for implementing that plan. So for example, you could have a plan to implement a new feature, and you know that the UI components for that feature are implemented in one directory, and the backend API is implemented in a different directory, and the supporting libraries or dependencies that the server code is using is implemented in another project, which is also in your workspace. So what you can do then is ask AI to create a plan for implementing this feature, and to pass along with that request also the relative paths to your workspace directories that are relevant for creating that plan. And for planning, I usually use GPT-5. I think it's an excellent conversational model that creates a really good plan. So it looks at it takes a more holistic view of what the task is all about, and it researches the context using the file search tools that are available in Cursor. And then it usually produces a plan that is not too long as well, which is important because you want to be able to review that plan quickly as well. And the plan doesn't really need to be that long, but it needs to include relevant context as well as relative paths within the workspace. So when you get AI to create that plan as a first step, you can then review what the next step is going to be, and you can take that finished plan that you have reviewed and pass it to another model like Claude Sonnet 4 to implement that plan for you. And I find that that is really the best way to get started and to actually get really good results with a tool like Cursor.
Yeah, that's a fantastic practical breakdown. I love that idea of starting by just having the AI help you build a plan and then using those relative paths in that structure to feed it the right context. It's a nice way of thinking about AI as almost like a project manager that understands your workspace. So I think our listeners will really appreciate that tip. Start with a plan, feed the AI the right slices of context, and then go from there. Let's keep going and see what other nuggets we can uncover. It's really all about giving our audience those actionable insights. So let's pivot a bit and talk about workflow optimization. Once a developer has that plan in place and they've got their agentic AI kind of working with them, what do you think is the most effective workflow for actually combining that human creativity and AI contribution? Are we talking about something like pair programming with the AI or maybe some kind of review loop? How do you see that playing out in practice?
So I think in practice, once you have a plan and you start implementing that plan, so you give the plan out to Claude Sonnet 4, for example, and you ask the model to implement the plan, it's going to change a lot of files in your workspace. And while the AI is working on making the changes, you can actually start reviewing the changes, because in Cursor you can click to the next change that's been made and you can review all the changes that AI is making. And following along with AI, I think, is also very useful, because if you discover that it starts doing something that doesn't make any sense, you can stop it quite quickly in its tracks or correct its course as well. So working together on the implementation and giving it as much of the relevant context as possible is extremely important. And then once you have implemented the first draft, the next step is to ask it to implement tests for the code that it has just written. And you need to approach this step in quite a structural way as well, because if you just ask AI to write tests, you're not going to get the best possible test cases. So you need to create. So what I do is I go to ChatGPT and I create a set of rules for the language that I'm working on. So let's say you're working with Python. You can go to ChatGPT and you can ask ChatGPT to outline the most important coding rules for writing Python tests, so that the tests are robust and concise, and that they're testing important side effects of the code that the tests are calling. So that you get a list of important features that constitute to a well-structured test case. And then you save that in a markdown file. And when you ask AI in Cursor to write tests for you, what you do is link to that file. So you provide a relative path, because that file is also in your workspace. You can keep it in a different Git repository, but you should still check that repository out into your workspace. And you can then reuse that set of rules with all the tests that you're writing. So you would ask AI to implement the tests by following the rules. And to verify all the code that it has just written. So once the AI has written all the tests, you can then run the tests. And I like to optimize that step by creating makefile targets. So I can just type make test. And I can also instruct AI to rerun all the tests by simply running make test. So that kind of simplifies the communication. And once you run the tests, most often they fail, or you discover some problems. So then you can ask AI to iterate on the code and rerun the tests, and also update the tests where necessary, so that the code and the tests are working together. So what you're creating then is this relationship between the code and the test cases that are verifying the code, so that when AI makes changes or subsequent changes to the code, because coding is a lot about making edits. It's not the first version that counts, it's the edits you make to it, and how easy it is to make edits also over time. So you need to have some way of constraining the generation, or the way the kind of code that AI writes and the features that it develops, by writing tests. So then if AI breaks anything in the future, your tests will discover that this part has been broken, and then AI can go back and fix it. So I think as part of the workflow, that is a really powerful workflow, where you try to constrain it, but you try to not constrain it too much. So you ask it to write tests for high-level features of the code without going into implementation details. You're not testing implementation details, you're testing the actual features that are relevant for using that piece of code or that class that you're developing. So that would be the next step for somebody in terms of having a powerful workflow with an agentic AI coding assistant.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic walkthrough of a really thoughtful workflow. It's all about that interplay, letting the AI do its thing, but also staying in the loop, reviewing changes as it goes, and then making sure those tests kind of become your safety net. And like you said, you're not just testing tiny implementation details, you're making sure that high level functionality is solid. I think that's going to be super helpful for developers listening in. They can walk away thinking, okay, I have a clear idea of how I can pair with my AI tool and not lose control of my code base. All right, let's keep the momentum going and dive into the next piece. We've talked a bit about planning and workflow, so maybe let's jump into something like context management. A lot of developers worry about how much context these AI agents can actually hold and how to feed them the right pieces without overwhelming them. So, from your perspective, how do you ensure that the AI always has enough context for multi file reasoning without hitting any limits? Let's give our listeners a little insight into that.
So most of the time, I don't rely on code search tools that are built into the IDE. I don't rely on AI finding the context by itself. I explicitly specify where the relevant context is. I find that that gives better results, and it also avoids potential pitfalls of AI finding some file that is completely irrelevant for your project. So I always specify what directory we're working on, and I always specify any dependencies of the code we're working on, so that then the model will load those specific files and it will work with just those files. So I find that that limits the context a lot, and it really just limits the context to what is relevant.
Yeah, that's a really smart and kind of intentional approach. By explicitly guiding the AI and basically saying, hey, here's the set of directories, here's the relevant files you really need to pay attention to, you're reducing that cognitive load on the AI side and making sure it's not wandering off into irrelevant parts of the code base. That makes total sense. And I think that's a great takeaway for listeners. You can get better results if you guide the AI a bit and don't just rely on it to magically find everything. It's kind of a partnership where you provide a little direction and it does the heavy lifting within that scope. It's always fun to dig deep into these topics and give developers something they can really sink their teeth into. So let's keep going and continue unpacking all these layers of working with agentic AI. I think the next piece we could dive into might be how these AI tools can help with things like architectural decisions or even keeping documentation and code in sync. So let's roll right into that and see where it takes us.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to documentation updates and keeping documentation up to date with the code, the workflow that I follow is that I use the diff of the merge request. So you know that Cursor supports MCP tools, and and you can connect, for example, GitLab to Cursor using GitLab MCP tools. And that gives you a very powerful way of manipulating and changing GitLab merge requests. So then you can take a URL to a GitLab merge request, and you can type in the agent window, and you can tell the agent to inspect all the changes that have been made in this merge request and update the relevant documentation. And then I would also attach the path, the relative path to the documentation sources, which is usually markdown files. And what will happen is that the agent will use the GitLab MCP tools to query the diff of the merge request, and then it will analyze all the changes that have been made in that merge request, and it will then look in the directory of the documentation files, and it will update the documentation files that are relevant for that query. If you have a lot of documentation files, then I would attach a path that is pointing to either the specific files that need to be changed or to specific directories within your documentation structure that contain the relevant documentation for that merge request. And if your merge request is too big and you have a lot of changes in it, try to split it. Like, don't try to put too many things into a single merge request. Try to split it, and when you split it, then it becomes also easier for AI to take just a focused set of changes and make the necessary updates to the documentation.
Yeah, That's a fantastic strategy. It's kind of like using the AI as a really smart documentation assistant that's just paying attention to exactly what changed in that particular merge request. And like you said, by splitting things up and keeping those changes focused, you're making it a lot easier for the AI to do a good job of updating the right docs without getting overwhelmed. I think that's a really practical takeaway for everyone listening. It turns what can be a tedious task, keeping documentation in sync, into something a lot more automated and a lot smoother. And it's all about just giving the AI that focused diff and pointing it to the right files. So yeah, I think that's a great note and definitely a helpful workflow for our audience. Let's keep rolling and see what other gems we can uncover. We've covered a bunch of ground, from foundational differences of agentic AI to workflows, context management, and documentation. So let's pivot a little and talk about one more angle that I think could be really valuable. The idea of using AI to help new developers onboard faster. We touched on how it can keep documentation up to date, but let's explore how it can actually help new team members get up to speed. How do you see agentic AI playing a role in that kind of onboarding process?
Oh, definitely. I think we discussed a little bit the steps of the workflow where you start with a plan. And I think the experienced developers in the project are very fast at creating such a plan, and they can also review a plan really well. So I see the way to really onboard new developers is to follow a workflow where you connect your Jira and your Confluence or GitLab, and you create the plan for the upcoming tasks that need to be done, and you instruct AI to publish that. So you can say, plan the implementation of this task, you give it the context, you give it an explanation of what files need to be changed and how they need to be changed. So you're an experienced developer, you can do that. And then when you get the plan, you also ask it to publish that plan to a new issue at GitLab or to create a new ticket in Jira. And then you review that plan, you make sure that it's all sound, and you give that task to a new developer. So now the new developer has a very thorough description of the task and what needs to be done, along with the context, along with the file paths within the workspace that tell the new developer where the relevant pieces of code are. And the beautiful part is that the new developer can take that plan and feed it directly into a Sonnet 4 model, for example, and have Sonnet 4 model implement that plan. So they get a direct possibility to create value and also learn at the same time without having to dig through the code by themselves. And as a new developer who is being onboarded into the project, once you have AI create or implement a task, you can then ask AI to explain exactly why it implemented that task in that way. And that gives you additional learning information that you can consume to learn more about the internals of the project. And you can then try to debug that new implementation. So you get to start in a very accelerated way where you don't need to know everything about the code base to actually have something. You use AI to help you implement the new feature, but then as you're doing that and as you're debugging the code that's been implemented, you learn more about the code base. It's always easier to learn more about the code base by having some code that you can actually run and observe the results. So I would really I really see companies that are successful at implementing this. They need to have this structured workflow of planning tasks, giving those plans to a developer, having that developer learn and ask questions from AI, and having that developer then produce an actual working merge request that passes all the tests, and then the senior developers can review that merge request and give the developer additional feedback. And all that process doesn't need to take months. It can take just a few days from start to finish. And the developer can feel that they have created a win, that they have actually contributed something to the project.
Absolutely. I think that's a brilliant way to look at it. You're essentially giving new developers a kind of AI augmented onboarding buddy. It's really all about making that onboarding path shorter and more empowering for new devs. They don't have to just sit there feeling lost in a giant code base. They get to learn by doing, with the AI kind of guiding them along the way. And that means they can contribute real value much faster. I think that's a perfect note for our listeners to take away. Use agentic AI not just to get things done, but to help people learn and onboard in a much more interactive way. So thanks for that deep dive, Martin. I think we've given our audience a ton of really valuable insights today. This has been a lot of fun.